It was Jesus that said to the woman at the well that there will be a time that you will not worship at this mountain, and the Jews will not worship in Jerusalem. And he said that time is now. He said because God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. God is the object of our worship, but he can only be intimately experienced when we live in spirit. If we have lives that are only controlled by what we can see, we will never see God. We will never see him. I am of the mindset that the mind can perceive the realities of divinity, but it's going to take God penetrating my mind while I seek to penetrate him. And I seek to penetrate him as I seek to penetrate him through his word. And when I penetrate that, he penetrates me, and I find myself in a space the Bible calls in spirit. In spirit. And it is only in that space, that sacred space, that spiritual space, where we can actually taste the realities of the thing we cannot see. Recognize that there is a reality that we can see those things. Paul is very clear in the book of Romans. In Romans 1:18, he says, the eternal nature and his power is clearly seen by the things which are made, that they are without excuse, primarily speaking about the Gentiles. In other words, they have the evidences that are needed to be able to come to the conclusion that there is a being higher than God. But what is interesting in that text, he says, even though the evidence is manifest and it is accessible, the evidence is, what ends up happening is they suppress the truth. In other words, for anybody to have an unconscious reality, or rather a conscious existence where they don't taste or experience God, is because that individual mind has suppressed that he is. In other words, suppressing of God's reality is my choice, not God. Because the evidence I need to experience the eternality and the power of God, all the evidences are accessible. If I don't find it in creation, which I can clearly, definitely find it in his revealed word. And for one to not be impacted by God in any way, shape, or form, whether it be by natural revelation or by divine revelation, what that individual has done is he has desensitized himself. Does that make sense? So I only can experience God when I allow my mind to become sensitive and not insensitive to everything that he's revealed to us, that we may grope for him, Acts chapter 17. The Apostle Paul is very clear to those on the Areopagus, the Morris Hill. He's very clear that God has designed the world in such a way where every human being should long for it. Because he's not far from any of us, because it is in him that we live, and we move, and we have our very being. That makes sense? So if you don't feel God, you don't feel his existence and his presence, it may be become that I have become desensitized to it. It's not because God desensitized me, I allowed myself to be desensitized. Because all of the evidences I have that communicate his existence, I have not accepted those. Do you feel God? Do you experience him? Do you get that same tingle in your mind when you hear about God that you get when you hear that song that stirs your spirit? See, again, we can play certain songs and everybody's spirit in here will get stirred. But when you hear Jesus, do you get that same excitement? I thought that was a good question. That's why I asked. Amen. Good morning. Good to see everybody here on this Lord's Day morning. Recognizing we do have some visitors from Sister Love's family. I see her sons, her daughter-in-law. Grateful to have you all here with us. We laid her mother's body to rest on yesterday there in Jefferson. As we all know, she lost her mother here recently, last week. So let's continue to pray for that family as well as her children. I know a son and his wife will be traveling back to Virginia if I got that correct. So pray for them. Let's go to the book of Romans, chapters 4. Bear with me for just a few moments. My allergies have been messing with me the last few days, and that stuff has a tendency to have its way with me. So bear with me, but just for a few. In the book of Romans, and the chapter is 4, and the verse that was read, and I will repeat that same verse, it is this. Who, and I can also say he, because the context, if you were to read it, it communicates Jesus. He, the text lets us know, he was delivered up for our trespasses, and raised for our justification. In this text, you can see two works that were accomplished by Jesus. We're going to specifically focus on one, but I feel the need to address the other because the other one makes no sense without the one. What do you mean? Let me explain. The text is very clear in that it says he was delivered for our transgressions, or he was delivered for our trespasses. Some translation would even say offenses. To put that simply, what that means is that he, that's Jesus, he was delivered by the plan and the foreknowledge of God. He was delivered for the sins of humanity. That's why he was delivered. And so this is a clear pointing to Calvary. In other words, so when I see Calvary, when I see the cross, I come to a reality. Why is Jesus historically having to undergo such mistreatment? It was because of our trespasses. It was the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 53. I will not go through there and read that entire text, but he is clear that he was wounded for our transgressions. He was put to death for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. In other words, let's be clear, for every human being that walks the face of this earth, you cannot claim that your sins have been covered had it not been for Calvary. Nobody can claim sins being covered without Calvary. Nobody. And Paul is very clear. Paul has already communicated in this text as he sought to outline the predicament, the spiritual predicament for both the Gentile and the Jew. We see that in chapter 1 and chapter number 2 when he clearly outlines the reality of the spiritual condition of both Gentiles and Jews. Primarily it was because they refused to accept the truths revealed to them. The Gentiles are refusing to accept what they learn about God that is revealed through the natural revelation. They refuse it, and so in their refusal, what ends up happening is this. As they continue to refuse, they move farther and farther and farther away from God because they are worshiping and serving the creature rather than the Creator who is above all and is blessed above all. But we got the Gentile community that sees fit to suppress the truth, reveal to them, and detach themselves even more from God. And eventually the text lets us know in Romans 1:24, 26, and 28, the Bible is careful to point out that Paul says God gave them over. He quit on them. He quit on them. Do you not really know what it's like to have God to quit on you? I hope you don't. I hope nobody here knows what it's like to have God say, I'm done with you. But I would also encourage you in this regard also, don't let him get to that point where he is tired of you. Because he will quit. When he will say he's done, I can do nothing more with that vessel. All of my advances have been refused. Every time I set a block within their path to get their attention, they do not listen. Paul said this was the Gentile problem and is also the Jew problem. Why is it the Jew problem? It's not because they have rejected the natural revelation. No, they have essentially rejected Jesus. He, having been born among them, had provided all of the evidences needed for them to be drawn to him. Paul makes that perfectly clear. He makes it perfectly clear that everything that you need for you to be drawn to him, you consistently and continually refuse. And he said, you suppose that because you don't do what the Gentiles do, that you're going to escape, oh man? You suppose that you, because you are a Jew and because you have the law and because you were circumcised, do you suppose that because you are the natural offspring of Abraham, that you're going to refuse his righteous judgment, not recognizing that his goodness is supposed to lead you to repentance? And that's the thing you have not done. Does that make sense? That's in Romans 2. And so based off the evidences that he has, he says in chapter 3 that as he analyzes humanity from present day backward, he comes to a conclusion that there is none righteous, no, not one. I want to be perfectly clear that when Paul says that, quoting Psalm 14, he is not at all saying that man cannot be righteous. He's speaking of a reality because of their rejection of him. All truths have been refused and rejected. And they are unrighteous because they have rejected truth. I want to be clear, when Paul communicates there is none righteous, he's not saying that's a condition that we cannot meet. That is not what he's communicating. He's communicating a reality that there are some who are not righteous, and the reason why is because the Gentiles have refused truth, and not only the Gentiles, the Jews have refused truth. That's why they are unrighteous. It's not that they have to be. Make sense? And so I know I'm not doing much preaching today. I'm trying to make sure I speak clearly. I don't sit up here and cough on everybody. So bear with me. And so when we get to chapter 4, he brings up Abraham because the question is going to be about Abraham is he's argued that your salvation does not come through the works that you do, but it comes through the faith in the Son. And so the obvious question is, well, if it's the faith in the Son, and they understood the Son to be Jesus, that the obvious question is, well, Abraham was declared righteous in Genesis 15. There was no son then, that this son that you're talking about, Jesus, Paul essentially said, yes, it was. Yes, it was. Abraham's faith was not in Isaac. Abraham's faith was in Jesus. Everybody that has ever been made righteous was because of their faith in the Son. Paul makes it clear, or rather Jesus makes it clear in John chapter 5 and verse 46, and that he says, Moses spoke of me. He says, you don't believe Moses because you don't believe me. And Moses wrote about me. See, Moses expected something greater than the Canaan land. Moses expected something greater than the Levitical priesthood system. Moses was looking and anticipating something greater. And just in case you don't believe me, I'll give you another cross-reference. That's Hebrews 11:24. Why did Moses refuse to partake in the riches of Egypt and chose rather to suffer with the people of God than to have all of the amenities that Egypt had to offer him? Brother, you could have been Pharaoh. You could have had women feeding you grapes. And you refuse all that to go out into a desert and live with rebellious people? Why would you choose such a feat? Because Christ has something better to offer. Just go read it. Hebrews 11:24-25-26. It's in the Bible. What were you talking about, Moses? I'm looking forward to Jesus' coming. Even Jesus says of Abraham in John chapter 8, around verse 54-55, said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. You know, when God began communicating the Son to Abraham, yeah, he was expecting Isaac, but he was definitely expecting somebody else that was going to come out of Isaac. It wasn't just about Isaac. He was grateful for Isaac. I am convinced that he loved Isaac. But he was looking for somebody that was going to flow out of Isaac. And it was not Jacob. It was not Isaac. It was not Joseph. It was Jesus. That's who he was waiting for. So Paul says in Romans chapter 4, to the Jews, was not our father Abraham justified by the works that he did? No, not at all. His faith was in the Son. And when he believed God, what God did with that he trusted in the promise of the Son, when he trusted that made him move in the appropriate direction. James 2 to get that. What we find then is God says, now that type of man is righteous. This is what Paul is arguing. Chapter number 4. And so he gets to the end of the matter, chapter 4:25. Having said all that, what have you said? What have you said, Paul? All men, the whole world has a sin problem. The entire world. Sin, unjustified, unrighteous. But he was delivered for our trespasses. And he was raised for our justification. The Bible is clear. I don't have to go through a bunch of passages to make this case. I could, but I won't, because I believe everybody in the assembly, for the most part, will believe this, that you nor I were adequate to face Calvary. We can argue that, and what's your point, Brother Armstrong? What do you want us to get from that is that when all men are sin, there is not one man found, and John, the Revelator, makes this case in Revelation chapter 4, as he sought among the human family. He looked for a man that could go up to the Father and open the book that was in the possession of the Father. And as he analyzed all of humanity, he saw not Moses could do it, not Noah could do it, not Joseph could do it, not Elijah could do it, not David could do it, not none of the prophets could do it, not no woman could do it. Nobody could come and face the presence of God and get the book out of his hand and reveal to humanity their victorious story. No man. But prior to one of the elders coming and saying, John, don't weep, he was crying. Because he knew that there was no man, not one man, fit to face God for man. Not one human being. Didn't matter how good he was. He wasn't good enough. Moses was a good man, but he wasn't good enough. He could deliver from Egypt, but he can't deliver me from sin. I appreciate David being the good king that he was. The one after God's own heart. You can appreciate a man like that, but that man can do nothing for my sin. I appreciate Noah and him being righteous in his day. So was God appreciative of him? And I appreciate a man that can stand in the midst of a corrupt society and say, I'm standing with God. I can appreciate that, but he can do nothing for my sin. Nothing. Only one man could fix my sin problem. Just one. And he was delivered. He was killed. He was brutalized. He was humiliated for me. But he was also risen for my justification. He was risen so that I could be justified. Because without him, I am unjustified. As I thought on this lesson, I didn't give you my topic. He is risen, but am I? He is risen, but am I? He is risen. And can I be emphatically clear? He's going to be risen tomorrow also. He was risen yesterday. When Tuesday comes, you know what I can still say? He is risen. As I go through the rest of this year, every day, the rest of this year, you know what I can say? He is risen. As we begin next year and get to looking forward to Christmas of 2023, if we still here, and Easter, you know what I'm still going to be able to say on New Year's Day? I am still going to be able to proclaim he is risen. And he has been risen since around AD 30. And he hadn't went back to the grave yet. He's been risen. The question is not whether or not he's been risen. It's whether or not I have. Because the Bible is clear in this passage that we're thinking on. He was delivered for our transgression, but he was also risen for our justification. Now, because he is risen, it doesn't stand to reason that I am. See, justification is made accessible by his resurrection. But just because justification is made accessible, it doesn't mean I have been justified. There is a sin problem. Jesus came to deal with the sin problem. He's not concerned about me celebrating him on one day. We put on new garments and we come and we wear our Sunday best. We got a new change of clothes. But have we put on Christ? That's a greater question. I got a beautiful garment to cover my skin. But have I put on the garment that can cover my sin? See, the good news is that I can be covered. Not with a garment. This suit not new, it's old, y'all. I've seen it before. But do I have on the garment that covers my sin? The good news says I can be covered. The best way to celebrate the resurrection is to live a resurrected life. Dead to sin. Let's build on that case. What's the problem, church? Sin. That's the problem. Why were you delivered, Jesus? Because humanity has a sin problem. You know Jesus actually cares. Have you ever thought about Jesus actually cares about my sin problem and he doesn't want me to stay in it? We're going to get to the he is risen part in just a few minutes. I know probably what you want to hear. And I'm going to get there. But see, we can talk about he is risen, but always miss the meaning. That was the reason he was risen. Paul said he was risen for our justification. Why do I need to be justified? Because I got a sin problem. He didn't just come just for us to come together in the spring day in April and say, hey, he is risen. No, that's not why he did it. He did it because he cared about me. He actually cared. He didn't have to do it. You know what Jesus did with volunteer service? You know, think about that. How many people will volunteer to come in here and clean the carpet? Just volunteer. Nobody has age, just volunteer. Clean the toilets. How many people are going to volunteer to do that? Bring a dish to feed everybody in here. How many people are going to volunteer to do that? And Jesus volunteered to be humiliated because of my transgression. Can we even get people to volunteer to do things just for the local assembly and congregation? And I'm not saying no, we can't. I'm just presenting a question. Only you know whether or not you would. But Jesus volunteered to die for me. And when he got up, he said, you can come and I'll clean you up. And that's the good news. Watch what Paul does in Romans 6. Let's go here. We've been talking about this passage for a few weeks now. I still find it rather interesting. Myself, I do. Jesus volunteered to die for you so that you would be freed from the wrath of God. Everybody in here knows at some point in time there may be those who still are. And when I thought about this lesson, I was going to begin to make some historical arguments and claims, things that have been said through history from the first century forward about this person, Jesus. It's a lot of convoluted information out there about this particular account. But was interested even about the bad information. There was one guy by the name, I just tell you this, I won't go into a lot. There was one guy by the name of Thallus in history. He was a Greek historian, probably a Samaritan. But he said something about Matthew 27:45, when the day was dark. Y'all remember that? Y'all probably heard that before. But he begins to try to attribute that activity to an eclipse. At the negation of the events being caused by God. But what he does and what he does to indict himself, he actually acknowledges that something happened on that day. Even though his conclusions are flawed, he acknowledges that day there was something unique and distinct that happened. All of his information is flawed. But what those individuals do is they indict themselves because what you're trying to refuse, you actually recognize it happens in your refusal. That's the strength of the critic's arguments. I don't have to take the stuff in and run away from it. Only people that take critical information and run with it is those who don't want to accept the reality of Jesus. You don't have to convince a man who has already come to the conclusion that the historical document, the Bible, is real, and everything history says accurately about Jesus is real, and the things that are flawed, that are said about Jesus, actually communicates that there is a Jesus. Does that make sense? So I'm going to do some of that historically, but that's not what I want to do. Just to put it out there. The resurrection is real. The Bible not lying. Jesus is real. God is real. The Bible is not lying. If I had time, I can actually show you some divine fingerprints that's even within the scriptures that no man could ever have come up with on his own. That's the strength of the narrative that we have when we learn how to get acquainted with it. We can actually argue from this. The Bible is all sufficient. If I'm equipped with it, I can stand toe to toe with any man. Bring the criticism. I'm going to show you the same history that you believe is right here. It's interesting how Luke records his documents. He always filters his information through history that everybody accepts. All to make one point. It was this day, this day, this day, this day. Nobody argues that. Jesus, oh, we got a problem now. You have no issue with all that other stuff, but you got a problem with him. Your problem is not him. Your problem is that you don't want him to be Lord. That makes sense? So that's what I'm going to kind of do historically. I don't want to do that. I want to get more theological, and I want to get practical. Theological. Why did he die? Because humanity has a sin problem, and the theology of the resurrection indicates to humanity that God actually cares, he's concerned, and what God wants to do is make justification available to him because that's how much he loves humanity. The cross and the resurrection is not just an expression of the deity of Jesus, it's an expression of the love of God for me. That's what the cross says for me. Because Moses couldn't do it. No one couldn't do it. David couldn't do it. I can argue Brother Armstrong couldn't do it. But somebody did. And it's good news that I can be justified and God will look at me through the lenses of Jesus and he said, that brother never sinned. That's justification. God looks at me as if I never sinned. I don't have to walk around claiming to be a sinner. I don't have to. That's not how God looks at me when he justifies me. Ain't that good, friends? God can look at me as if, let's make it more theological. God looks at me the same way he looks at his son when the son justifies me. The same way. The same way. Same way. You mean to tell me I went through none of that, and all I got to do is obey the gospel, live under the authority of Jesus, and when God sees me, he sees me the same way he sees his son? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Man, ain't that good? Ain't that good? But there's a charge. See, all that good stuff requires a commitment. Romans 6 says, what shall we say? Are we to continue in sin that we may receive more grace? No. No, you don't get more grace by keeping in sin. Now, I would go back and explain chapter 5. I will not right now other than to say, Paul talks about the deadly nature of sin that was brought into the human family by Adam, and it rose to its greatest heights. And when sin rose to his greatest heights, grace covered it. So I just keep sinning so I get more grace, right? Paul said that's not how it works. What's the problem? Humanity has a sin problem. Why did Jesus come? So he can be delivered for our transgressions. But then he was risen for our justification. Watch what the text says. He says, how can we who died to sin still live in it? He says, do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? I explained this a few weeks ago. I want to explain it again. What happens for me is the dead vessel, the dead soul. I am dead in trespasses and sins. Romans 1, 2, and 3. I am unrighteous. Romans 1, 2, and 3. And because of my sin, God sent Jesus and put my trespasses on him. And he died for my offenses. And so he took my offenses and he put my offenses in a grave. That's what he did. And he resurrected. When he resurrected, he had already dealt with my offenses, my sins, my trespasses. Now, when he resurrects, he no longer has to deal with that. It's done. It's done. And what he does for me, the sinner, when I come to him through gospel, I listen to the good news. What is the bad news? The bad news is I'm an enemy of God in my sin. The bad news is I will not go to heaven if my sin problem is not dealt with. The bad news is I am walking through life on my own without Jesus. That's just some of the bad news. The good news is God sent Jesus. The good news is I can come to Jesus and have my sin covered. The good news is I can come to Jesus and no longer be an enemy of God, but a son. That's the good news. I don't have to walk through life struggling with sin if I got Jesus. Jesus gives me the power to pull away from it. Now, I'm not saying that you won't struggle initially, but you struggle. You struggle. You struggle. And when Jesus sets you free from it, you're going to be free from it. You will never go back to that thing again, not because you are pulled or what you're drawn by it. If you go back to it, it's because you chose to. But my God has the power to save my soul from all of its quirks. James 1:21. I believe that. That's good news, brethren. I know I have access to divine power that can remove all the dirt from me. All of it. Man, that's good news. You trying to tell me I don't have to live constantly in this condition? No, you don't. But you're going to have to fight. But you don't have to fight alone. God is giving you Jesus. He's giving you the Spirit. And He's giving you the gospel. You don't have to fight by yourself. Stop fighting by yourself. You got divine help. To add to that, I got the angelic host who's concerned about me also. Man, that's good news. I don't have to fight this fight by myself. I'm glad I don't. It's hard fighting it with God. I can only imagine what it's like doing it on my own. But that's good news. Everybody all right? Paul says, do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? We were buried, therefore, with him by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. Did you see that? Did you see when I said earlier that God, through Jesus, looks at me the same way he looks at his son? See, when I recognize I got a sin problem, I accept it. That's the bad news. The good news tells me I don't have to keep it. You can die to it. You know, you can actually divorce it. Completely. I die, that's separation. Jesus, he take my sin and he connects it to all that sin that he killed. He put it in the trash pile. He resurrects me. He said, okay, now I'm going to give you my life. You knew. And what I want you to do is stand behind me because I'm going to be your refuge. I am your protector. I'm your protector. And see, now when my Father sees you, he sees me first. I'm your mediator. All you have to do is listen to me and walk like I tell you to walk. If you walk the way I tell you to walk, see, when I got up, Romans 15:12, when I resurrected, I also resurrected to reign. See, one thing about God, thing about Jesus, see, here's what's interesting. I thought about this as I was looking at that text. We fight over local, state, and federal officials who are going to govern us. Do you know you ain't got to fight over Jesus? All you have to do is come to him. Jesus got enough for everybody. Do you not know that Jesus is actually concerned about the well-being of every human being? You don't have to fight over Jesus. Jesus actually said, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest for your soul. Is that what he said? He's the King, eternal, immortal, the only wise God. That's him. When he resurrected, not only was he approved by God, showing his identity, but see, now I can have a king and a ruler that actually is concerned about my well-being. I appreciate David, but see, David wasn't fully trustworthy. See, in 2 Samuel 24, when David counted the people of Israel, because of David's sin, 70,000 Israelites died. And none of them did the sin. David did the sin. Think about that. Who did the sin, David? David messed up. He did. And 70,000 people in Israel dead. God sent an angel. Just start wiping them out. And he was going to go until God said stop. He got to 70,000 people and God stayed his hand. Hold it right there. Then he sent a prophet to David. He said, now, I'm going to give you 3 options. You messed up. 70,000 people are dead because you didn't trust me. 70,000 folk. David was a king chosen by God, but David messed up. See, I got access to a king that never messed up. He didn't make a bad decision. None. What would it be like to have a president over you that never did wrong? I mean, everything works out for the good of everybody. Black folk, white folk, Caucasian, Asian folk, Mexican folk, Aborigines folk. I mean, it's just work out for everybody. I mean, it's just everybody living in harmony and unity. Man, everybody got what they need. Man, life is just marvelous. What would it be like to have a president that comes to the White House that did that? That's the very thing Jesus does for everybody that comes into his house. That's the very thing he does. You know the best way to unity? I hate to say the best way, the only way to unity is through the Lordship of Christ. That's it. Jesus actually provides for every human being, everything he or she needs to be in unity with one another and with himself. You know why we continue to have problems in our world at the pace that we do? It's because people don't want to live under the lordship of Jesus. But Jesus was risen to reign. He is the king that can actually tell everybody in his kingdom, okay, this is the best thing to do for you, for God, and for everybody. And when I resurrected, I made myself available to you. Now, will you come? Will you come to me? The great invitation we have commonly called it. You're not going to get a greater one than for God to say, come to me. But Paul says, I'm almost done. He says, when you are baptized with him, you're baptized into his death. You rise to walk in newness of life. Well, how am I able to rise to walk in newness of life? Because when he rose for our justification. And so now when I participate in the hearing of the gospel, acknowledging my sin problem, I am buried with him by baptism into death. He takes my sin, he puts it in the graveyard, and he resurrects me spiritually, and he puts his life in me. And now I can walk new. I'm fresh. I got a new beginning. Man, that's the good news. And I can walk in harmony with God under his lordship. And when it's time to deliver his kingdom up to God, if I have lived under his lordship and under his guidance, when he takes his kingdom and transitions it into the possession of his Father, and he say, here they are, I'll be there. That's good news. I can be back in the presence of God once again. That's the good news. Why was he risen? So that I can be justified. Now, he was risen. The question is, am I? See, John is very clear. He came in 1 John 4. He came to put to death the deeds of the devil, sin. He didn't come to keep me in it, brethren. He came to deliver me from it. Because that's my problem. That's what keeps me at odds with God, sin. Jesus is the solution. But what does he say? When you are baptized, you rise to walk in a new life. he says, for if we have been united with him in a death like his, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. In other words, he resurrected clean, so guess what? I'm supposed to resurrect clean. He now lives in a capacity where he serves God in heaven in the eternal kingdom. I am now in a capacity where I serve God in the heavenly kingdom on the earth. Is it not good news to realize that God actually allows me to work with him and for him? Not just for him, but with him. He allows me to be viewed just like his son. He makes me a brother of Jesus and one of his sons. He becomes my father. He gives me all of his inheritance. You don't have a will like the will of God. I can sit back and wait on my mama to die and cash in if I want. And she may have a lot to offer, but guarantee you this, mama ain't got nothing like Jesus got. I'm not waiting on mama to die so I can cash in. I'm waiting to die so I can cash in. Amen? All right, let me sit down. I'm done. That makes sense? That clear? Did I confuse anybody? Anybody got questions about anything I said? He was risen so I could be. So I can be justified. So I can be risen from a dead life and now walk in a new life under his lordship and under his guidance. Being no longer an enemy, but a son. The good news is that I no longer have to be God's enemy. I can be his son as long as I do what the son says do. And if I do what the son says do, John says, man, I'm telling you these things so that you know you got eternal life. I ain't got to walk through life scared. Perfect love casts out fear. Nobody's walking in the light with Christ ever fears where they are spiritually. Nobody. The only people that fear their spiritual state as it is present is because they know they're not walking right. See, walking confidently with God removes that doubt. It removes that fear. There is no concern. I can know. And for me, that's good news to know I'm good with God. To know I'm good. John says it. Man, I'm going to tell you how to know you good with God. Man, that's good news. To know I can walk in confidence. As long as I stand with Jesus, I don't care what you say or anybody else say. I'm good with God, and that's all that matters. For me, that's good news. Y'all all right? Let me sit down. I went longer than I planned to go. Y'all got me excited. If you're here with us this morning, I want you to know he is risen. Indeed he is. But he was risen so I could be. Risen from my sinful condition. Resurrected from the same. Walking in a new life. He came and he was dealt a fatal blow. He was humiliated. He was interrogated. And he endured all that shame joyfully, because he saw what his work was going to accomplish. He did that for me. I can't speak for you, but I know what he did for me. You got to make a choice whether or not you come to the realization what he did for you. I know what he did for me. Brother Armstrong should have been gone a long time ago, but still I stand because of him. If it is, brother, you don't have to have a sin problem. You don't have to. His son. I don't know about you, but I don't know how much I compare to Jesus. But God said, I didn't ask you. I told you. Walk right. You my son.